justice, temperance, wisdom, courage. Applying ancient philosophy to modern times, this is the Sunday Stoic.
Howdy, I'm Steve, and this is episode 25 of the Sunday Stoic. This is a podcast where we apply ancient philosophy to modern life and maybe update it occasionally here or there to better fit our modern era. I put out a show every Sunday, and also occasionally I put out a midweek episode, a review of a Stoic reading or some advice or some form of short episode. Today's episode is about being a philosopher in the modern era. What I mean by that is, I've had some listeners write in and ask this, and I've thought about it myself. We read about becoming a philosopher in these ancient texts. And what does that mean? Or what does it mean now, more importantly? Does it mean that I give up everything and I live on the side of the street and I own no possessions and I do nothing but study philosophy? Or do I have a life on top of being a philosopher? What kind of a life should I have on top of being a philosopher? And of course, we won't root out every answer to that question in this short episode, but we can begin the discussion. So, one thing to keep in mind is that Marcus Aurelius was an emperor. He was not a pure full-time philosopher, right? He applied philosophy in his life. He used it in his life and was a full-time politician, basically. Seneca, as well, was busy in government. Now, Epictetus was a slave most of his life and then seems to have created his own school of Stoicism. So he kind of did philosophy full-time. And there are many other Stoic writers as well, but we don't have much of their works these days. I also am going to discuss a little bit of Musonius Rufus. He's another one who was a merchant and became a full-time philosopher. But chances are for most of us, we can't do that. I can't afford to be a full-time philosopher. I'm using Stoicism to create a philosophy of life to help me navigate the real world, not a world where I sit around and think about what the good life is all day long. So, I think we can be philosophers and factory workers, philosopher soldiers, philosopher bankers, philosopher police officers, philosopher teachers, whatever it may be. We are not going to shy away from reality as Stoics. We're going to study philosophy so we can lead a happy life. That doesn't mean we're going to lead a quiet life. So let's hear what the Stoics have to say about this. The Thoughts of Marcus Aurelius, Book 3, Chapter 5. Labor not unwillingly, nor without regard to the common interest, nor without due consideration, nor with distraction, nor let studied ornament set off thy thoughts. And be not either a man of many words, or busy about too many things. And further, let the deity which is in thee be the guardian of a living being, manly and ripe of age, and engage in matter political, and a Roman, and a ruler, who has taken his post like a man waiting for the signal which summons him from life, and be ready to go, having need neither of oath nor of any man's testimony. Be cheerful also, and seek not external help, nor the tranquillity which others give. A man then must stand erect, and not be kept erect by others. The Enchiridion by Epictetus. Number 10. With every accident, ask yourself what abilities you have for making a proper use of it. If you see an attractive person, you will find that self-restraint is the ability you have against your desire. If you are in pain, you will find fortitude. If you hear unpleasant language, you will find patience. And thus habituated, the appearance of things will not hurry you away along with them. Moral Letters to Lucilius by Seneca, Letter 94, on the value of advice, verses 72 through 74. Therefore, if our dwelling is situated amid the din of a city, there should be an adviser standing near us. When men praise great incomes, he should praise the person who can be rich with a slender estate, and measures his wealth by the use he makes of it. in the face of those who glorify influence and power? He should of his own volition recommend a leisure devoted to study, and a soul which has left the external and found itself. He should point out persons happy in the popular estimation, who totter on their envied heights of power, who are dismayed and hold a far different opinion of themselves than what others hold of them. That which others think elevated is to them a sheer precipice. Hence they are frightened and in a flutter whenever they look down the abrupt steep of their greatness. For they reflect that there are various ways of falling, and that the topmost point is the most slippery. Then they fear that for which they strove, and the good fortune which made them weighty in the eyes of others weighs more heavily upon themselves. They praise easy leisure and independence. They hate the glamour and try to escape while their fortunes are still unimpaired. Then, at last, you may see them studying philosophy amid their fear, and hunting sound advice when their fortunes go awry. For these two things are, as it were, at opposite poles, good fortune and good sense. That is why we are wiser when in the midst of adversity. It is prosperity that takes away righteousness.
The Fragments of Musonius Rufus, number 11.
What means of livelihood is appropriate for a philosopher? There is also another means of livelihood, in no way inferior to this. Indeed, perhaps it would not be unreasonable to consider it even better for a strong person, namely, earning a living from the soil, whether one owns his own land or not. For many who are farming land owned by either the state or by other private individuals are yet able to support not only themselves but their wives and children as well, and some in fact attain even a high degree of prosperity by hard work with their own hands. For the earth repays most justly and well those who cultivate her, returning many times as much as she received, and furnishing an abundance of all the necessities of life to anyone who is willing to work. And this she does without violating one's dignity or self-respect. You may be sure that no one who was not demoralized by soft living would say that the labor of the farmer was degrading or unfit for a good man. How, I ask, could planting trees or plowing or pruning vines not be honorable? Are not sowing seed and harvesting and threshing all occupations for free men and befitting good men? Even keeping flocks, as it did not disgrace Hesiod, nor prevent him from being a poet and beloved of the gods, so it would not prevent anyone else. In fact, to me, this is the most agreeable of all aspects of farming, because it gives the spirit more leisure to reflect on and investigate the things that have to do with our own development and training.
Like the show? Help support the Sunday Stoic by rating us on iTunes. Volunteer to read, suggest content, or send comments to sundaystoic@gmail.com. Thanks, and carpe diem.
So there's the advice of 4 different Stoics on living. So Marcus Aurelius, the emperor, he had a lot on his plate, right? He's basically the king of the known world at the time, at least of a good chunk of it. And he's giving advice to himself. If you have not read the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, check them out. It's basically his own diary reflecting on his philosophy, to remind himself of his philosophy so he could live it more clearly with greater success. He says not to work unwillingly. So whenever someone says, hey, I need you to stay for a late meeting tonight, you don't go, oh. You say, all right, let's do it. You don't want to be drug along life. You don't want to be drug along life like a dog being drugged by a cart on a leash, right? You want to follow along. You want to be happy about it whenever possible. So do things willingly. And he says to always keep in mind the common interest of humanity. So is what you're doing good for humanity, or what can you do to make what you're doing of greater benefit to humanity? And I like where he says not to complicate your life with too many things. We're all good at this. Hey, I'm going to do this, then I'm going to sign up for that, and then I got to take the kids to this thing, and then I have these 4 hobbies and these 12 projects at home. He warns us to be careful about filling our life with too much stuff. Leave some breathing room in there. And note that he says he's engaged as a Roman citizen, as a ruler, and he's going to do his duty until he is relieved. So he is not separating himself from the world and living as a philosopher up high on a mountain somewhere. He's doing a very difficult job, but his philosophy that he has studied his whole life is helping to keep him sane while he is doing this job. And lastly, he says, don't rely solely on others to be happy. A man must stand on his own and not be propped up. And we know as Stoics it's important to have community, to have friends, so there are times when you may rely on friends. But as Seneca says in another reading, our main reason for having friends is so we have people to help. We shouldn't think of them as people that are there to help us. So he's giving himself a pep talk here, Marcus is. A pep talk about living stoically and being a good person. And I want to note that, once again, we can benefit from others, but you don't want your happiness to rest on relying on the help of others. That would be very unstoic. Epictetus then gives us some practical advice for living, no matter what your career is, no matter what your job is. He reminds us that to take every challenge as a training opportunity. Life is a training ground. So whenever a new situation pops up, a new opportunity, a new frustration at work, whatever it is, ask yourself how you can use this new thing as an opportunity to apply virtue and to improve your stoicism. So when someone pops in and says, hey, we have a meeting, an unplanned meeting that's going to last all day, or you have a flat tire on the way to work, or whatever it is, rather than being frustrated and mad, accept it. You have no control over it. And figure out how to apply virtue. If it's something that would make you mad, now use this as an opportunity to try out self-restraint. If it's something that would make you want to sneak away and do the wrong thing, practice justice instead. So you can practice various virtues, practice patience, as he suggests here. If someone's annoying you, rather than fly off the handle, use it as an opportunity to practice the virtue of patience. So that can apply to any career, any sort of life. We're not talking about secluding ourselves in a garden like the Epicureans may have suggested. We're living in the real world, and we're using this philosophy to keep us sane, to keep us motivated, and to keep us from flying off the handle as new situations arise beyond our control. Seneca, always the wordy Stoic. He has a lot of writings out there, more than anybody else, really. Seneca in other writings does advocate, if possible, retiring to the country where you can study philosophy all day long. And he realizes, however, this is not an option for most people. So he says, if you live in the country, in this reading, I didn't read the whole writing here, but he says if you live in the country, it sort of makes you modest. You don't dress up to show off to your cows, right? You don't dress up or buy new possessions to impress the neighbors if you have no neighbors. But he says, for most of us, we live in the city. We live in town. We live around others. And so he says, if you can't live in the country, which sort of forces moderation upon you, instead you live in the city, you should have a coach. You should have a Stoic teacher that helps to guide you. And we don't have this opportunity in the 21st century so much. You can listen to podcasts where I give you some advice maybe, but even I don't have a coach, right? So we're trying to build our own internal coaches. And maybe you have a friend that you can talk to about this philosophy, or you can email me. Not that I would say that I'm the expert Stoic here. I'm learning alongside you. But what he says here is we should have a coach to help us walk the right path through our busy lives. So he says rather than trying to gain power, so when we're like, ooh, I wish I was powerful, our coach would whisper in our ear and say, hey, I mean, look at these people who have all this power. They might look like they're happy. They might look like they have it all down pat, right? They have everything figured out. But in reality, once you have that power, it's like being on the top of a cliff. You climbed all the way up, but now people want to push you off, or you could easily fall off and be brought back down to earth. And so your whole life you're just worried about how you're going to lose that power, how you're going to lose that money, how you're going to lose that prestige. So we need to keep those sorts of things in mind. And we often need to be reminded of that. We can get carried away with our own desires, and having another person there to remind us can be very helpful. He said these people cling to this power and this fame, and only when they're at risk of losing it all do they finally discover philosophy as a last-ditch effort to save themselves, to save some form of happiness. And at the end, he says that having really good luck usually means we don't have very much sense. And I think you can see that playing out in the modern era as well. Those who have it made are often make the dumbest decisions. They don't have to make good decisions a lot of the time because they can afford to mess up. But sometimes they mess up so badly they lose it all. So when you don't have much, you can't afford to be foolish. You must be modest with your possessions. And that same advice giver in this reading says, rather than looking up to those who have it all, look to someone that you know that has a very modest income but lives a good, solid life, and model yourself after them. Lastly, I included a fourth reading here from Musonius Rufus. He's the only Stoic, at least the only Stoic whose writing I could find that gives good practical advice directly on how to live, even though most of us won't follow it exactly. He says that a good example of a career for a philosopher would be that of a farmer. It's honest work. It doesn't lower your dignity. You go out, you work hard, and of course there are things not up to you like rainfall and things, but you work hard, you harvest the crop, and that's how you make your money. There's nothing dishonest about it. And he also says that it gives you an opportunity to think about things deeply. And I grew up helping on a farm. I wouldn't call myself a farmer. My brother and my dad are farmers now, but I helped on the farm. But it's true when you're, at least in the modern era, when you're on a tractor for 6 hours at a time, plowing or whatever, you have time to think about things. And so I would say it's still a good career choice for that. A lot of our careers keep us so busy that we stumble home, we're exhausted, and we don't have much time to think deeply about philosophy. So even if you don't have this perfect career, even if you are a super busy person, it's important to make sure you find a little bit of time to read this philosophy, to think about it, and think about how to apply it in your life. If you don't make the time, it doesn't just show up. So just take 15 minutes an evening before bed to read a little bit of Stoicism. Maybe jot down what you did today and how you could have done it more stoically. Think about what tomorrow has to bring and what things are going to happen the next day that you can predict. And think about things that might happen unexpectedly and how you might apply Stoicism to those situations. How could you act differently than you normally would? Do these things, and no matter what career you have, you can be a Stoic and a member of the 21st century. We don't have to sneak away and live in a garden somewhere to be a philosopher. The advice of the Stoics tells us that to live in the real world, and their advice will help us to keep a level head and help us to be happy in the real world. All right? Stay Stoic. Shoot us an email, rate us on iTunes, and all that good stuff. I appreciate your listening, and carpe diem.